So our talk tonight is about a Peru adventure, and that we did in October, November 2019. And why Peru? Well, for one thing, there's a lot of birds in Peru. And for a second thing, I went to a Birds and Beers at some point. It must have been in early 2019. And they had a picture of this bird that they showed, and I just thought this looked like a fascinating bird, and I needed to see that bird. So I started talking to a few people about who wants to go to Peru and blah, blah, blah. And eventually we put together a group of 7 and hooked up with a tour company in Peru. And the rest is what you're going to hear about. So there were 7 of us, most of whom you will recognize, John and Lori, of course, Mark, Pat, who's on tonight, Steve Weiner, and Diane. And that was the group of us. Several of the group went down to Peru several days early. They were the smart ones. One went off to Machu Picchu, and 4 of them went on a one-day trip to see the condors. I gather this was quite a hike to see the condors, but they had wonderful views. These are John's photos of the condors. I was not one of the smart people who went early, and so I missed this, but the John and Pat and Lori and Diane went and had these fabulous views of the condors flying all over. By going early, of course, they also had time to acclimatize to the altitude. So here's a map of what we did and where we went. Lima is way off here on the left, on the coast, of course. We flew into Cusco, flew Lima to Cusco, and then spent, actually the 2 of us who arrived at the end, Mark and I, arrived Saturday morning at 6 at the airport, and were picked up in the van and immediately started birding, driving up into the Andes this way, up to Ollantaytambo and into this area. We spent a couple of days up here in this, driving this road up and back, quite high in the Andes. Then we went back to Cusco for a night and then started going down in elevation, down through here around the Cock of the Rock Lodge, which we're going to get to. When we got to here, Atalaya, then we got on a boat, and the rest of the trip was done on a boat from Atalaya down this Rio de Madre Dios, spent 4 nights here, and then carried on down and eventually ended up down in Puerto Maldonado, from where we flew back to Lima. So that's just to give you an idea of what we covered. We're down in the Amazon basin here, and here we're high up in the Andes. The first place we went after leaving the airport was to this Huacarpe marsh, where we saw quite a few birds. Probably the prettiest was this little many-colored rush tyrant, kind of acting like a marsh wren, flitting around in the reeds in the marsh until some bigger bird came and stared it off. This rail, the Plumbeous rail, was there, had a chick, but I didn't get a picture of the chick. This thrush we did see quite a lot, but I thought I'd put 1 picture of it to start with, and some teal. There were also in this marsh, we saw some pintails, Peruvian pintails, and some ruddy ducks. Not exactly like ours, but they look very similar to the ones that we see here. This day we spent quite a lot of day driving, and although I didn't get to go to Machu Picchu, we did see ruins as we drove along. A lot of ancient ruins here. You can see this old, whatever, town or something, and there's some sort of this kind of thing that we saw quite often. I'm not quite sure why these were like this, but this is all ancient ruins. In the afternoon, we went to this hobby farm where this enterprising man had realized that if he set up some bird feeders and got a lot of hummingbirds, he could get the tour guides, the birding tours to.
I think I could do that.
Somebody's not muted.
But like I say,
could you please mute yourself?
Days and or times, just fill me in. So.
Dave, could you please mute yourself? We can hear you. So
Right, you may not.
We went to the hobby farm where this guy had set up feeders that.
Brad.
Okay, just hold on a minute here. I'm going to try to find this. Dave person and mute you. Dave,
Accept a couple of jobs and get 2 paychecks.
Dave, please mute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see where this person is. Huh. Anyway, so we went to this hobby farm, and this is what we saw.
You might get worn out, though.
I am sorry, but I don't know.
So going back to the dog, when are you headed to Jasper?
Hello.
Not leaving until PM.
There's somebody who wasn't muted. Maybe that was him. Sorry, I'm trying to find...
Sorry, Ann, this is John here.
Yeah.
I scrolled down through the participant list, and there's Carol and Doug who are not muted. Marcia's iPad's not muted, and Dave's, somebody by name of Dave is not muted.
Okay, can you mute them, or I'm going through it now looking?
You haven't been there before.
Yeah, if you scroll down your participant list and look to see the mics which are not muted,
yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing.
You should be able.
I can't find this one that's not muted anymore.
And right underneath your name.
Yeah, but I haven't got the whole screen up.
And right after you. In the participant list, it's right after your name.
Okay, just hold on a second here. There's Dave, got it. Okay, I think I got it. Okay. Share. Okay, back we go. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. Okay, so these were the common birds that we saw at this hobby farm sort of place. Rufous collared sparrow, which I'm sure if you've been anywhere down there, you've seen before, but they're so pretty. They're kind of like house sparrows here, but they're much prettier than our house sparrows. Eared doves, we saw a lot of. Golden bill saltator, we saw a lot of. And the Sierra French, we saw quite a bit of. We started to see some hummingbirds. This bearded mountaineer, quite an attractive bird. This was on the side of the road. A lot of the hummingbirds we saw were at feeders. Most of the places we stayed had feeders or a lot of flowers in the garden. So most of the hummingbirds we saw were at the feeders, like this shining sunbeam was at a feeder. But this this mountaineer wasn't. He was in the bushes on the side of the road, which was kind of interesting to see them not being brought into a feeder. Here are some more of the hummingbirds. The sapphire wing, we actually saw quite a few of those while we were up quite high in the Andes, not at feeders. This train bearer was in the garden at the hotel, and these two were on the road, tiny, tiny little guys on the road. This was the road we were driving, this Cusco to Kulambamba Road that went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we actually spent quite a lot of time driving up and down this Malaga Pass. It was going up over a pass, stopping here and there to see what was there, but primarily to get to the top of the pass. But the scenery on the way, we would be looking down into valleys like this on the right here, where you can see these sort of farms with a lot of sheep and alpaca. But you can see how high we are, hardly any trees at this point. These were two of the birds that we saw quite a few of. The Pungus Sierra finch up here. I was sitting on the ground one time while people were climbing something, and this guy came right in and sat right beside me and just was so curious. It was really interesting. And then this white-winged Synclodix, we saw him quite a few times on that road. The women, all dressed in their beautiful, colorful skirts and wraps, were herding the sheep. There were also herds of, or flocks, I don't know if you call them herds or flocks of sheep and alpaca. They guarded the sheep, but not the alpaca. And when I asked why, they said the puma is the predator, and the sheep are stupid about the pumas and will be killed by them, but the alpacas are much smarter and can deal with them. So they don't bother to herd the alpacas, but they do watch the sheep all the time. And this is a mountain caracara, which we saw quite a few of. Again, we got up to the top of this pass, this Malaga Pass, and we're quite high up, like over 4,000 meters. Rufous-breasted chat tyrant up there, not a terribly good picture, but they were kind of deep in what vegetation there was. An Andean lapwing up there, quite a few of those. And puma ibis, of course, they look like our ibis, sort of, and they were migrating at that time, really beautiful. And then Andean geese, which interestingly were not migrating, they are there all the time and are in pairs all the time. So there was always a pair of them, and they were there. On this itinerary of our trip, it called for a 4-hour hike on day 3. I was a bit concerned about this, but thought by day 3 I would be sufficiently acclimatized to doing a hike. And we drove past the start of this hike several times, and the guide kept saying, "This is where we're starting the hike. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it." And I would look at this and think, well, look at that. It's a path. It's well marked. We only have to go up to this ridge here, and then it's downhill from there. It doesn't look too bad. It should be all right. Well, notice here we're starting at 4,400 meters. That's 14,000 feet. And there's not much oxygen up there. And to get up to that ridge, it took about 45 minutes, with having to stop about every 3 steps to try to get some oxygen into your lungs, because it's just breathing so hard. However, on the way, there are these beautiful tiny little flowers that are just all along here in between the stones and the grass. So as I was trying to get breath, I was also trying to take pictures of these tiny little flowers because they were gorgeous, kind of like what I imagined tundra to be. Once we got to the top of the hill, then you look down into this valley. This picture Laurie Anderson took and sent me. We're top of the ridge is here, and you're looking down into this valley that we're going to walk out. We actually walked through that farm yard down there. There was a woman sitting in the circle down here doing some weaving. Our goal is way down there, but the scenery was beautiful. This is looking sort of left from the top of the ridge. This is looking right from the top of the ridge. And there's a mountain up here with snow on it, a glacier on it. Clouds were rolling over that mountain and bringing rain, bringing drizzle, and at one point bringing hail, but mostly sun on the way down. This picture, I finally saw the road at the end. So I was cheering by the time we got here. We passed lots of alpacas on the way. The walk took not 4 hours as advertised, but actually 7.5 hours. And we saw 3 birds on that hike that we did not see anywhere else. One was this blue-mantled thornbill, which interestingly is a hummingbird that walks on the ground. And when he said that, I thought to myself, right, I've never seen a hummingbird on the ground, because we don't ever see hummingbirds on the ground. They're always up and whatever. But this bird actually walks on the ground because these are the flowers that it particularly likes. And they are so low to the ground, the only way he can get at them is to walk along on the ground. So that's kind of interesting. And we saw this ground tyrant and one spine-tail, tit spine-tail. We saw quite a few spine-tails on the trip, but this was the one that we saw at that altitude. Then as we moved along, we also saw this Andean flicker. We actually saw this Andean flicker quite a few times up at altitude, and it looks like a flicker, right? It's a little different than our flicker, but it looks very similar to a flicker. And we stopped for lunch at this place and looked over this scenery here. It was just beautiful. All the farm yard and how they've cultivated on that hillside. It was just beautiful. And then this is a family cultivating a field with an oxen pulling the hand till here, and the wife planting the seeds as they move along, and the kids helping out somehow. And then as we were going down, we passed some really fast-flowing rivers, and on the fast-flowing rivers, there was this duck, a torrent duck, kind of like a harlequin duck in that it really likes the fast-flowing rivers. It was in and out of the water and swimming and then jumping back up onto the rocks. Beautiful looking bird. And then as we kept going down, we've started in Cusco, we went up the Andes here. Now we're coming down from Cusco down in elevation and south as well. This is the Manu Park, which is huge. And people don't go into the middle of the Manu Park. There are a few lodges along the river on the edge here, and a few lodges along this edge. But the main part of the park is uninhabited, and tourists don't go in there. So we're coming down the edge here, and then we're going to go up this way. Interesting sign here that says there are 1,025 species of birds, 221 mammals, 1,307 butterflies, and the rest of it, well, some of this you can read and some of it you can't read, but it's interesting. We saw a lot of the butterflies, beautiful butterflies. So some of the first birds we saw were the torrent tyrannulet, little guy on the fast rivers who was in the same place as that torrent duck, just flitting back and forth, mustached flower piercer. You can see he's got that little pierce at the end of his bill here. And a great hummingbird. This actually doesn't show how big he is, but he actually is quite a big hummingbird. The road here, this is a 1-lane dirt road that is steep cliffs going up and as steep cliffs going straight down. And only a very few places to pass on this road. So here we were coming, this is our car, we're coming down. This car was coming up, and these guys here were trying to tell him he had to back up because we weren't backing up. And he was saying, no, you have to back up. And eventually, after much argument, he did back up. Treacherous. He backed up and we snuck past him. Diane took this picture as we went around a loop, sort of a hairpin loop, looking back up at the road, which is here, which is obviously eroding, and they've tried to reinforce it with some concrete blocks. It's pouring rain, and we drove over that several times, holding our breaths and crossing our fingers. However, the birds now are starting to get really interesting because we're coming down in altitude and we're getting into forest and into some dense forest. So we're starting to get some tanagers here. This is a hooded mountain tanager, a black-faced brush finch who is kind of cute and saw a lot of those, and a white-banded tyrannulet who was quite curious about us, actually. Butterflies and moths everywhere. I put them all on one slide so we can just have a look at them. They were beautiful, and everywhere we stopped, if there was a little puddle on the road, it was full of butterflies or moths, and every one of them was different, and they were just gorgeous. If I wasn't into birds, I'd probably get into butterflies. They were just beautiful. So now we're into heavy forest, and you can hear the birds, and we're hoping that they're going to hop out onto a branch, because of course it's a thick forest going up from the road and thick forest going down from the road, and so you can hear them, but it's hard to see them, and they have to kind of pop out onto the road in order to see them. Now, we did see these two jays, this purplish one and this white-collared jay here. And this was a glossy black thrush with his beautiful orange beak. And this spine tail, we spent quite a lot of time waiting for him to pop out, and eventually he did just pop out, show himself beautifully to us. Wood creepers, one of my favorite birds in the tropics. Hard to find because they kind of blend in, but also the minute you point a camera at them, they go around the back of the tree. So they're hard to photograph. We saw quite a few wood creepers. I only managed to get photos of 4 of them. Look at the beak on this one. Huge wedge-billed wood creeper. They all look kind of similar, but the cinnamon color is so pretty. They're just lovely. Woodpeckers, saw a lot of woodpeckers. Some of these were seen up at higher altitudes, but I put them all on one slide just so that you could see the variety of woodpeckers that we saw. Of course, some of them look kind of like our pileated, but this one is just beautiful, this cream-colored woodpecker. We only saw that the one time, which is too bad. And then some of the other birds that we saw a fair bit. We saw a lot of masked flower piercers, the cardinal, the red-capped cardinal, you've probably seen if you've been to the tropics before, barred fruit eater, and a chat tyrant, very pretty with his orange breast. Tiny birds, some really tiny. This little mountain wren had a mouthful of moths and whatever that he was taking to feed his nest. The toady flycatcher is just a little tiny wee thing. A spotted toady flycatcher, and this beautiful cinnamon flycatcher doesn't really show it here, but when he's agitated or displaying, this front forehead sort of opens like a disc and is bright yellow on this beautiful cinnamon body. It's really beautiful bird, but tiny in the woods. And then we found our iconic quetzals. We saw 2 different kinds of quetzals. These were, as we were driving up that road, the guide spotted them on branches. Here, a golden-headed quetzal and a crested quetzal. We only saw each one of them once, but that may have been because the guide wasn't looking for them after we'd seen them. I think sometimes they show you a bird and then they don't feel they need to show it to you again because we've got other things to see, so we don't bother looking for them again, I think. Toucanets and trogons, two kinds of toucanets here and a toucan here. These were usually far away, hard to get decent shots of them. And then trogons, we only saw two kinds of trogons, which kind of surprised me. I thought we might see more. And an aracari, who I think we only saw the aracari once. Yeah, beautiful birds. Back to hummingbirds. Again, these are mostly taken at feeders at the lodges. Most of the lodges had like a main dining room area, and then in front of the dining room area, they had feeders and gardens. And so when you went to the dining room area, you could just look out over the veranda and find all these hummingbirds. So we have a wire-crested, he's got a big crest here, a wire-crested thorntail, this guy with his racket tail and his orange booties. This one we saw a lot of violet ear, sparkling violet ear, speckled hummingbird, and a wood star. And some more. A lancebill, this one we saw on the road. The driver, one bird, we're driving along the road and he says, well, we're going to pull in here. And he just pulls in a little bit and said, okay, it's a bio break. Everybody go and find a tree. And then he said, and there happens to be a blue-fronted lancebill right here in the tree. And he knew that that was going to be there for somehow, I don't know. It was amazing. A coquette, beautiful coquettes. Jacobin, star-throat. This is a jacamar, not really a hummingbird, but a bluish-fronted jacamar. Tanagers, wow. So many tanagers and so beautiful, the tanagers. We saw, this was probably the most common one. We saw the silver-beaked tanager because he was at every feeder. Every feeder had this guy at him. Blue-necked, blue-gray is very common. Not as common here as it was in Costa Rica, but quite common. Saffron crowned. This cute little guy, orange-eared. This was my favorite, golden tanager, just beautiful. Look at that big eye. Paradise and masked. This one was the guide's favorite. He kept showing us this one over and over again. And then barbettes, three different kinds of barbettes. At feeder, this one was at the feeder. I think these two were on the road somewhere. And puffbirds, I didn't really expect to see puffbirds because I always thought they were kind of dark, deep in the forest, hidden, dark. You wouldn't really see them. But actually we saw two different kinds of puffbirds. And I think this one, there were actually two there on that tree when we found them. They were just on the side of the road. So this cliff, we drove past this cliff several times and didn't see anything. And then finally the guide stopped us and said, okay, look at that cliff, there's a bird there. And eventually we all spotted this lyrebird so well camouflaged into the cliff that it was really hard to see. And then every time we drove past that cliff again, it was still there, right beside the road. Like you could have reached out and touched it. But he just was so well camouflaged that if you didn't know he was there, you wouldn't have seen him. This was one of the lodges we stayed at, the Cock of the Rock Lodge. Pat sent me this picture. And this was typical of most lodges, that everyone had separate cabins. And then down at the bottom of the hill here was a big lodge with where the dining room and the kitchen and the sort of sitting area was. The lodges none of the cabins would have electricity. They were at this one, actually, we had solar powered lamps in them. But the electricity was only down in the main lodges, and it was only available from 6 till 9 in the evening. But interesting enough, every lodge we went to had internet from 6 to 9 in the evening, which I really wasn't expecting, but it was. So when you go to the Cock of the Rock Lodge, of course, you're thinking, well, maybe we're going to see Cock of the Rock. And we sure did. We went to a lek, which this was just right off the side of the road. There was a little gate, and we went through this little gate, down a few stairs, and onto a platform that was built along the edge of this cliff that went down into nowhere. And in front of this platform were this dense forest, and there were about 8 male Cock of the Rocks, and they each had their own specific branch, and they came in twice a day and would posture and jump up and down and chit chat around and try to, vie for position. But they all had their own specific branch that were all concentric to this main branch. This was the alpha male, and this was his branch, and nobody went on his branch until he came into it. So he came in after about half an hour after we were there, and we'd been watching all the others who were spread out as to rank as they went down the hill. But then this guy came in and sat on his branch and looked at us and just, what a bird. It's just an amazing bird. This picture I stole off Google. This is the female. So she's got the same sort of head shape, but quite different in coloration. We did see a fleeting glimpse of her at one point, not at the lek, but somewhere on our travels. But I didn't get a picture of her, so I just took that one off Google to show you what she would look like. But just a fascinating bird, unbelievable. And to stand on this little sort of platform, it was actually pouring rain. We stood there and watched these guys for quite a while. Before this guy came in to this special branch, this motmot came into this branch. You can see that's the same branch that guy is standing on. And because the motmot had a nest underneath the platform we were standing on. And motmots build their nest cavities go into a cliff. So they don't build like a nest in a tree. It's a nest that goes as a tunnel into a cliff. So his nest, or her nest, I don't know, was right under our platform. So that kept coming in, landing on the Cock of the Rocks branch, and taking food into the babies. So that was kind of cool. So moving on, antbirds and ant shrikes are really hard to photograph because they're all black and they're tiny and they are high up in deep and dense forest, and they're really hard to find. So I managed to get 3 terrible pictures of ant shrikes, and this guy is a little bit bigger, and I think this is a beautiful bird. Just the ant shrike. Bamboo ant shrike is just gorgeous. This was the easiest bird to photograph on the whole trip. This was a Huatzin, and I was walking up from our cabin up to the lodge one night, different lodge than I just showed you. And someone said to me, "Anne, look left." And so I looked left, and right there on the tree were these guys, quite big. Just sit there, paid no attention to me. You can see there's a tail of another one up here. There were quite a few of them there, and a really weird looking bird, I think. At this lodge, we also saw tinamou. Tinamou are really hard to see because they're ground dwellers. They are deep in the forest. They creep along on the ground, and they're really, really difficult to find. And this is cheating because this was a place where they put out seed for the tinamou. and they had built a blind. So you could go and sit in the blind and hope that the tinamou came in. And in fact, two different types did come into this blind. I missed the second one because I suddenly realized that there were army ants all over the blind, and they were getting on my feet and shoes. And so I beat a hasty retreat and missed the second tinamou, but I did get that one. Tiger heron, I was surprised we only saw one tiger heron, but this one was quite beautiful, and the reeds and this wood rail was also wandering around in the reed. There was a little marsh here at this lodge that we were at. So now we're coming down to the river that we're going to spend the rest of the time on, this Madre de Dios River that flows into the Amazon. So here's our driver, Percival, and our guide, Percival. So Percy and Percy were with us until now. We were now about to leave the driver because we weren't going in a van from here on, but our birding guide, Percy, stayed with us. And we were going to get on this river and sail all the way down to the Amazon basin. This was the boat we were in. And it took us about 5.5, let me see now, on my notes. I think it was about 5-6 hours on the boat that day getting down to the lodge that we were going to stay at. The most surprising thing was we go past a little island and 3 burrowing owls pop out and look at us. I mean, I did not expect to see burrowing owls in the middle of Peru, in the middle of a river on an island, but there they were. So that was a big surprise. Black skimmer, something you probably would expect. A lot of sand-colored nightjars. The river was actually jam-packed with dead heads and dead logs and dead trees sticking up everywhere. Very fast current, and all kinds of these dead heads that were often covered with birds. A lot of sand jars. These are yellow-billed terns.
I'm just joining the Zoom.
And then we started to see parrots, because now we're down to the Amazon basin and we're starting to see macaws and parrots and parakeets and all that kind of stuff. So these are chestnut-bellied macaws here, scaly-necked parrots, dusky-headed parakeet, a white-eyed parakeet, and a white-bellied parrot. Just a few of the ones we saw. A lot of them, of course, you see them as they scream and fly over you. This was one of the best days, one of the best birding experiences I've ever had. We got up very early in the morning, took the boat up to a branch of the river, about half an hour, walked about half an hour into this blind. This is a blind that there's like a booth you're looking at the back of the blind. On the front of the blind, there's like a booth that you can sit at and look over at this cliff here on the far side. Okay, there's sort of a gully there, and then this sort of sandstone cliff over there. And the purpose of going there was that this is where the red and green macaws go to eat the clay.
Robbie, you can start the game.
Before the macaws came in, the other smaller macaws, or parrots and parakeets, all came in. So here we have more blue-headed parrot, the blue and yellow macaw, which is as big as the green and red, but most of the time we saw these guys flying by. Didn't see them too often sitting down. These little yellow-headed guys are the chewy parakeets, and then these ones, orange-cheeked and mealy parrots. So they all came in and they all did their thing, and then eventually, and while we're sitting at this booth, the best part of this was they served us a hot breakfast. So we had pancakes and eggs and coffee and juice and lots of fruit. And I mean, what better birding can you get? Is to sit at that booth, have a hot breakfast, looking out at all of these birds. And then the red and green macaws came in. They came into the trees first, and then one by one, they very carefully, because they're very shy apparently and very easily spooked, they eventually came down and they all got onto the sandstone cliff here, and they were eating this sandstone. What a sight. Just beautiful. As we're going along the river, as you would expect, we're seeing herons. This is a Kokoi heron. He's bigger than a great blue heron, but it looks kind of similar, but a bit taller than a great blue heron. A limpkin was in a marsh, and this beautiful capped heron. Saw quite a few of these actually as we were going along the river, just on the banks of the river. When we were from the boat, we spent 4 nights at this lodge, the Manu Wildlife Center. These were the cabins here. Very, very comfortable cabins. The only problem with these cabins was the only light was candlelight. So we were burning candles, and when they were taking us around and getting us into the cabins, they said, well, if the cabin catches fire, don't get anything, just run out. And I thought, oh boy, this is a bit nerve-wracking. But, you know, we managed with flashlights and whatever. And here, of course, some more hummingbirds, a coquette, a white-chinned sapphire, and this gold jewel front, which was beautiful, but it was so deep in the forest, so dark, so it's so difficult to photograph because it was just in the dark, dark area. And then one day they said, okay, we're going to go to the Oxbow Lake. So this was advertised as a trip on a catamaran through a marsh. Well, I wasn't quite expecting this as a catamaran. 2 canoes with some plywood and plastic chairs. We all spread them out and sat on the plastic chairs, and they pulled us around this marsh. So interesting. Sungrebe on the marsh, horned screamers, amazing birds, a little bit smaller than our Canada goose. They scream. I mean, they're called screamers. Well, they do scream. What I read said they don't fly very often, but they were flying this day. They were flying back and forth across the marsh. They have this funny looking horn up here, but also look at these funny looking barbs here. So they were pretty amazing. And there was one in the weeds that had a young one with it. So that one didn't fly, but the 2 or 3 of the others did fly back and forth. Giant otters. They actually didn't come very close to us, but were very curious from a distance, and quite big and kind of cool looking. And this Donacobius that was in the weeds, is kind of like a red-winged blackbird hopping around in the weeds, and about that size, and just singing away and hopping around in the weeds of that marsh that we were in. Around the lodge, there was this platform that you had to climb up this metal staircase, 144 steps, that's about 10 stories, 1 person at a time, because it actually jiggled as you went up. And then when you got to the top, there was a platform way up there. And from the platform, we saw some caciques, a chitira, masked chitira, and a bare-necked fruit crow. Not that much up there, actually. I think one of the parrots was up there, and a couple of the parrots flew by as we were up there. A bit nerve-wracking going up, even more nerve-wracking coming down that staircase, I have to say. One afternoon, we went on a boat trip just up a little tributary, 3 different kinds of kingfishers, all sitting quite nicely for us. and a jabiru. That was the last bird that we saw on the river. Well, almost the last bird we saw on the river, which was kind of interesting to see. Then we went to Puerto Maldonado and we flew back to Lima, spent a night in Lima, and then separate from that main tour, we had booked a one-day tour of the coast. And this was so I could see that turn that was in the very first picture that you remember. So we went to this town of Pucusana. We had a guide who took us to this town of Pucusana, and a beautiful little harbor here with these gorgeous, all beautifully painted fishing boats. So we got on one of these boats and went out through a channel through here and around that island. So we went out into the Pacific and around this island. It was extremely rough on the other side of this island, but it was wonderful. The birds were amazing. But in the harbor here first, Peruvian, what do you call it? Peruvian pelican, way bigger than our pelicans here, way bigger than a brown pelican, and really beautifully colored. This was the common gull, the Belcher's gull. And as we got around the island here, penguins. Humboldt penguins. I didn't expect to see penguins, but we saw a couple of penguins. They all, of course, immediately went into the water, but caught one just as it was going in. Surfbird on this rock. You can see this rock on that. This is the back of this island here. Looks just sort of grassy here, but on this side, it's all rock and it's just covered in guano because there's just all these birds. So here we have Peruvian booby, blue-footed booby, my Inca terns, gorgeous looking birds, those Inca terns, lots of them there. I think they're a pest actually there because the houses around the islands all had netting around them. We saw actually 3 kinds of cormorants. I only got pictures of this, the red-legged cormorant feeding a baby or feeding a chick. Oyster catcher, blackish oyster catcher, and some ruddy turnstones. And then from there we went to a sort of a swampy area where we saw some seed eaters, grass quits, brand-colored flycatcher, which was a beautiful colored bird, Cinereus conebill, not that exciting a bird, and this Amazilia hummingbird. It's a big hummingbird, very, very pretty hummingbird. And then we went to a beach, was our last stop. Here are those Peruvian pelicans flying over the ocean, and a whole beach full of Franklin gulls. So now we know where the Franklin gulls go in the winter, because here they are, thousands of them on this beach. Amazing. Oyster catchers, a Peruvian flamingo, not in a young one and not in his bright colors. These are pintails, white-cheeked pintails, whimbrels that we're familiar with, and a Peruvian thick-knee. That was the last bird of the trip, our Peruvian thick-knee, which the guide obviously knew was going to be there because that was the last place we stopped, was to see this, and he knew that was going to be there. So it was a good end to the day.